You're listening to the Around the Lens podcast, the home of high-quality, roundtable, visual journalism discussion about the news, topics, and gear related to our career field. Now, here's the host of our show, David J. Murphy.
Hello and welcome to an Around the Lens interview. My guest today is Anthony Dawton, an award-winning London-based photographer with extensive experience working overseas for non-governmental organizations, photographing in refugee camps and disaster areas. Anthony is also the author of Not London, a photo book showcasing portraits of homelessness around London, which came out earlier this month and is available for purchase at notlondon.uk. Anthony, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very well. Thank you.
Great. Glad to have you. Are you in London right now?
I'm in London, pretty central. I don't know if anybody knows London, but near Gloucester Road.
Okay, great. I don't know London that well. I did visit London about a decade or so ago. Wonderful place. Okay. The whole of England actually was wonderful. I traversed there. I started in London and I went down to the south of London, Bristol, right? That's to
the west, but that's okay. Yeah.
What's the southern London?
Brighton. Did you go to Brighton?
Okay, yes. I went to Brighton. And then I went west. I went to Stonehenge.
Lovely.
I traveled the coast up. I went to Edinburgh for the tattoo, the military tattoo, and then I traveled back down to London. Okay. So I saw the majority of the country. It was pretty awesome.
Probably seen more of it than I have.
That would be funny. Anyway, so glad to have you here. Good afternoon, by the way. It's your time over there. You've got this awesome new photo book that I got the chance to read and review, and so we're going to ask you some questions about that and kind of go into detail about where the book came from and what inspired it. But first, I want to let the audience know about you and who you are.
Okay.
So before we get into the book, can you tell me a little about yourself and your career? Start from what got you into photography in the first place, all the way to what you're doing today.
Okay, what got me into photography takes me back a long way. I guess the first thing was when I was sort of really in primary school. Nearly, I had a friend who lived in Hong Kong, and his parents sent him to the school that I was at, and he turned up with a Paulina electric camera, and it was amazingly cheap. It was about $20, and I asked him to get me one, and he did. And so I had this camera for several years, and that's really what gripped me, got me going. I got to university, joined the Photographic Society there, and became president of the Photographic Society. And my university, or my college, was unusual. It had a professional theatre, and it had a very well-known art school attached to it. And we had some great chemists too, who were part of the Photographic Society. They taught me all my chemistry. I began photographing for the art school, all their artworks. We had a theatre. We had a touring company that came along and shooting theatre. Well, you'll know that shooting theatre on film, you have to know what you're doing. You have to know your films. You have to know your chemical dilutions. You have to know how to process the negative to work under low-level light. So I was self-taught, but I think, or thought, well-taught. I left with a degree, not in photography, in history, but I got a job fairly quickly with the international auction house, Sotheby's. And I worked there for 3-4 years, photographing some of the greatest artworks in the world. And that was an amazing grounding. We photographed in 10:8, 5:4, obviously E6, transparency, huge education in how to light, and how to handle the technical side of things. We traveled a lot. I was often sent to big palaces and houses across Europe and South America to photograph. So quite a strong and useful start. I had a salary. We can only dream of that now as photographers.
I know, right?
And then I moved on. I left there, and I began doing some fashion and commercial work, and that kept me kept me rolling along. Nothing great, nothing big. I had to take other jobs to keep going. And then about 20 years ago, I began working for a charity on the administrative side, and they marvelous charity called the Armada Foundation, very small, Saudis, but really positive, forward-thinking Saudis. And they showed me a book photographed by Indian photographers called just called When It's Raining. And it was beautiful photographs of the poor and the downtrodden in India. And it had raised a great deal of money. And I said, look, I'm a photographer, I could do that. And well, they sent me off. They sent me off to Gaza. They sent me off to Palestine. They sent me off to Kashmir in 2015 after the earthquake. They sent me back. They sent me to Niger with UNICEF after the famine. So we published books. So I became established as a kind of overseas photographer working for NGOs, for charities, taking pictures to make books, to make exhibitions, to raise money and profile. And I've, in many ways, although I still have to keep my commercial work going, I do weddings, I do corporates. This working in refugee camps in disaster areas, it gets me out of bed. It really, really motivates me. And perhaps you and your listeners will be the judge of it, but I take better pictures now, which I think is marvelous, than I took 20 or 30 years ago. In fact, I just feel it's getting better and better. And I'm no spring chicken. And it's, well, and Not London, the Not London book is kind of just part of this I don't know, this upward path. For 2 years, I couldn't wait to get out of bed, get out and meet the people that I've been photographing and talking with. And I miss it now. I have no justification for doing it. You have to have a justification to photograph these people. I miss it. I go out without my camera to talk to them and tell them what's going on.
Okay, wow.
So stop me if I waffle on, of course. You will, I know, Dave. Yeah.
No, absolutely. That's great. No, I mean, that's passion is extremely important in our industry, and, especially nowadays, since there isn't a huge amount of money to make in it, but again, if you have the passion for it and the drive, that's going to definitely get you out of bed, and like you said, and get you creating beautiful imagery.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of beautiful imagery in the book. I think you took a lot of great portraits of these people, humanized them in a way I think we probably don't think about as we pass them along the street as they're begging for money or whatnot. So let's get into the book a little bit. And you kind of talked about what inspired you to create this book, but that sort of drive and passion. Was there anything else that inspired you, like to say, like, okay, I now, not just I want to photograph these people, but I want to turn this into a book? What kind of inspired that?
Well, it's not I'm afraid there's not an easy answer to that. The background is that I was coming back from photographing in refugee camps, and it suddenly came to my notice that all around me, because I live in central London, which is obviously a relatively very wealthy place to be, and I just kept seeing more and more people on the streets, and they seemed in a much worse condition than the people I'd been photographing in the refugee camps on the Syrian-Jordan border or wherever, and I couldn't handle it. I felt it wasn't right, but I also felt that I'd developed the necessary skills and technique to photograph this. And it's not, and I don't just mean by skills how to operate my camera, although that's very, very important. I mean the way you approach these people, that like refugees, they're already traumatized. They do not want a big film crew or flashy photographer pushing into their tent, shoving a camera in their face, and take a picture. I talk. You may be beginning to get the idea. I talk more than I photograph. Right. And I find, particularly in the Middle East, if you sit down at the same level and you talk and you listen, lots of things open up for you. They say, please take my picture, and then they introduce you to the family. And often it's very difficult to photograph the women, for example, in the Middle East. But if you take the time, then they will introduce you to that, and you get these rather special pictures. I'm not a photojournalist, so I'm not looking. I mean, I think photojournalists are great. I'm not looking for that action moment. I'm not looking for the bullet in the head. I'm not looking for the blood or the. I arrive anywhere far too late to get any of that.
Right.
I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for people to understand that these people are like you and me, and we need to take care of them, both specifically and generally. And I felt that was the case with the people on the streets of London. And it was immediately clear that when I'd seen other photographs. I mean, I'm not the first person to photograph the homeless on the streets of London. Most of them, they're either whisked into a studio on a white background, which is completely ludicrous, or the photographer keeps standing. So every shot you're looking down on these people. Right. It's like, it's humiliating. So I would sit on the pavement with them. I wouldn't even have, my camera would be in my rucksack. And I would talk to them, tell them what I was doing, what I was after. And then I'd say, could I take your picture? And they would say, yes. So there are a number of issues here. The first thing, I have implicit permission to take that picture, right. Which is quite important. I don't know what the law is in the United States, but in fact, they can't stop me taking a picture. I mean, they can walk away, or they can be very rude or difficult, or hide their face, but sure. You can't stop a photographer in a public place taking a picture in the UK.
Yeah, same in the US.
Is it? Yeah, but that's not how.
If you're out in public, you have no expectation of privacy.
Okay, yeah, but that's not how I operate, as you might guess.
Sure, no,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah, so I sit there.
You're not going to make very good relationships if you're just going out and shooting people.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, but there is a. You know, we'll talk about the fact that homelessness obviously is not a new topic, right? You know.
Yes.
We'll talk about that in a minute, but
okay.
Go ahead and continue on with what you were saying.
So, I took the pictures and I had no idea what I wanted to do with them, but I was very conscious that I needed to think about what I was going to do with them. Otherwise, I'm just taking them for my own satisfaction, not to help the people. And it was difficult. But I work. Well, I don't think it matters too much, but I worked for a very well-known artist photographing his artwork here, very successful artist. Cool. And he and a colleague saw my photographs and straight out of the blue said, we'd like to sponsor you for a book. So over a year ago now, I knew I had funding to produce a book based upon the pictures. So it's hard to describe where my actual inspiration was or where I was going, because the truth is, I really wasn't sure where I was going to go with it.
Right.
To begin with. Probably I would have sought an exhibition or similar, but being sponsored for the book completely changed what was possible. And I'm extremely grateful for that.
No, that's great. I mean, I talk to many people who, you know, have to essentially, how do you say, scratch up some money or, you know, go a fund me or something like that. And to know you have an actual dedicated sponsor who wants you to make a book. I mean, that's such a relief, I would think, as a photojournalist, you know.
Yes.
That'd be, you know, just like, okay, you know, you want me to do this and you're, you know, providing the backing, and it's just, yeah. So that's great to have that opportunity for sure.
It was. And I should underline, but that didn't involve my fee. I mean, it was just for the book. Right. So I've been, it's been doubly difficult because I felt obliged to do this book as well as I could, which has meant rather pushing my commercial side out a bit. So it's although it's a very generous offer, it's not been easy.
Sure.
But
you're
right.
Dedicate time and resources to this.
Sure. Yeah.
You're not dedicating to, like, say, your commercial work.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would only say that the final stages of making and printing a book, if you know nothing about printing, is a nightmare.
Oh my God. We'll get into the technical stuff in a minute.
Okay.
I did want to talk about, you know, the aspect of covering homelessness. You mentioned, you know, obviously you're not the first person in the world to cover this topic. Actually, it's kind of a topic that I've seen covered a lot in terms of, like, when I was going through university, I covered homelessness as a topic, right?
Okay,
I
okay.
did a photo story on a homeless person. I went into where they lived, and I covered how they lived, and it was when I was going to school at Syracuse University, Syracuse, New York. There's tons of homeless people around there, and
I can
again, when I
imagine.
look at other people who did work in that school, it's almost like clockwork. You always have the homeless person story, and
Mm.
almost every single time they're doing it. So with a topic that's as pervasive and sort of almost to the point of being cliche as homelessness, how did you sort of approach it differently? Obviously you're doing portraits, you're taking that time to get to know the subject and asking their permission, but did you come at it like, again, there's so many different ways to cover it, and it's been covered so many different ways. So when you were initially kind of coming up with this, I'm going to cover homelessness, why did you go with this tact? And sort of how did you sort of decide to differentiate yourself?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think the first one is slightly, and I don't mean it to be arrogant, is that every photographic project, commercial, fashion, charity, whatever you want, is been done a zillion times by everybody. So I just put all that to one side, and I think no one has done it like I'm going to do it. Um, I'm very good. I'm in the top 5% of photographers anywhere. The rest are playing at it,
Yeah.
and and I'm not specific about that, but I think if you're going to be a photographer with all the technology that's coming up, you need to have that attitude that you really know what you're doing. And some of that is steeped in the fact that I think you need to have an idea of what's been before that's been very good, the legacy that you're trying to continue. So I spend a lot of time seeking inspiration, often from other photographers, all the way back. I mean, people like Jacob Riis and people like that who were photographing in the 19th century in the slums of New York. And then, of course, the Great Depression, the Farm Security Administration photographers. I mean, they're my big inspiration, because they didn't so much photograph the death and desperation. They photographed the dignity of the people through no fault of their own, had been completely made bankrupt and homeless and desolate, but by the Great Dust Storm and the Great Depression. So I take my photographs bearing these people in mind, and I hope that gives them provenance, it gives them solid base, it gives them historical context, and I don't think there are a lot of other photographers who can do it, who understand it.
Yeah.
Perhaps there are, but I don't live with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, you have to kind of push away everything else that's
Sure.
existed,
Sure.
especially again with such a well-trod topic. But no, I think you definitely took a different tact on it, and it was definitely interesting to see, how you approached the subject, and definitely saw the humanness come through in your
Yes.
portraits. Obviously this book is designed to raise awareness about an issue, which is homelessness in London and the pervasiveness of it. But is there anything else you hope to achieve through the publication of this book?
I'm not sure what I need to do or to achieve. What I want is to show people that the homeless are deserving, are part of our own humanity. In fact, there's an argument that says because of the hardships that they go through, they have a deeper sense of humanity than you and I living in our comfortable bourgeois life. And we could argue that. And it's that expression to camera that I'm looking for, that this is a very hard life, but it instills certain values that maybe we should be concentrating on ourselves.
Yeah.
The book won't make money, but if it did make money, I don't know what to do with the money. It's not, if people say, are you giving 10% to this charity or 10%? I have no idea yet, but I want it to be a work of art. I don't want it to be a photojournalistic look. I want, and why it has to be art is because I want to transcend those things. I want to make these people beautiful. in the inside sense, not in the way they look. I want people to look and think, I suppose, but for the grace of God, go I.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned earlier, I think you said you spent about 2 years working on this book. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
How much of that time in that 2 years was devoted to it? Was this like something you did, with a few spare hours during the week, or were you like 40 hours a week on this? How are you dividing that 2 years?
Well, there are two answers to that. The first is approximately twice a week, I would spend a morning and an afternoon. I could manage 2.5 to 3 hours maximum each time. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's exhausting because the concentration levels are so high. You can't lose these people. Other people around you, probably a couple of guys even interested in picking up the rucksack you might have put down with your camera in. So it's exhausting. So yes, so that's 6 hours, 12 hours a week, if you want. And then I'm coming back. I'm doing all the stuff that you guys all know about, all the post, all the grad, getting it right in Photoshop and Lightroom, and which I think is in the book. I promise everybody I photograph a good professional print. So I print out all the photographs I've taken that day of each person, and I go back the next day and give them a picture of themselves.
Yeah, no, I read that in the book. I thought that was very honorly of you. Again, we sometimes think of our subjects as a means to our end, right? But we don't go back and actually give them the, dignity they deserve by giving them just a simple thing like a copy of their photograph. I know when I was doing my photo stories up in Syracuse, I went back after the fact. We actually produced like a book of photos from all of us students, and I gave those to my subjects. So I thought, doing that, and every time I've tried to, photograph a subject, I've tried to make an effort. I'm sure were there certain times when you couldn't find that person, or, after the fact, they weren't there.
Of course.
I mean, with the, we talked about the length, you took 2 years, but obviously homelessness is as expansive, as open-ended a topic as it is. I'm sure you could go longer. I think in the book it was mentioned there was like 130,000 homeless people in London, and correct me if I'm wrong. And so how do you choose an endpoint there? Again, with sort of an unlimited resource of homeless people, what are you saying, like, okay, I'm stopping now at 2 years, I have enough photos, or I've covered this topic? How'd you know you were done?
I'm not sure about that. I guess it was to do with the sponsors. They didn't push, but once the money was in position, I felt a responsibility to complete the project. So I would think within 6 to 8 months of being given the funding to do the book, I had ended the project. I certainly have enough. I could do 3 or 4 books from what I have.
Sure.
And I did understand that it could go on and on and on. So yeah, I think I felt responsible to the people who were backing me to get on and produce the book. The pandemic, of course, the COVID pandemic also slowed me down.
Oh, sure, of course.
So there was it made sense to me to produce the book and not go on photographing while the pandemic was at its height.
Right, absolutely.
So
So you got most of your work done before the pandemic happened, like
yes,
coverage.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did go out after, because what happened was, just briefly, there was a period where the London authorities took all the homeless nearly off the streets because of the pandemic, but they were all back within 2 weeks, and I needed to photograph that.
That's interesting. Yeah, because we haven't really talked about how the pandemic affected everyone, but every time ever since the pandemic started, I've always talked to people like how the pandemic has affected you.
Yes.
Did it have a big impact on your work outside this book?
Yes, it virtually reduced it to 0.
Oh wow. How'd you get through that?
I have a working wife.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. So, and in fact, she's a medic. She's a doctor. and
wow.
they were doubly in demand. So
Yeah, no, absolutely.
and
How's she doing?
sorry,
How's she doing?
she's
All
doing
this.
well. She was doing fine. Still very hard work, but I hope I did my bit in supporting her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
That's all you
but
can do. I mean, again,
yeah.
our medical worker is just,
Yeah.
ravaged by this thing, and I'm glad that she's safe, and
She's fine and well, thank you. Yes, yeah,
that's great.
yeah.
Great to hear.
Yeah.
This book came out September 9th, right? So it's been on bookshelves, hopefully around London and around the world for a few weeks now. Do you have any idea of the reception the book has received, with like sales or just
Right.
how out there it is?
The reception, I would say, has been very good. Um, I've had BBC TV coverage, and several others, and a couple of radio interviews. But the BBC TV coverage really sparked a big interest on my Instagram site and on emails directly to me. I can't say sales has matched that spike.
Right, of course.
Sales, I've never tried to sell a book before, so I have no idea, but sales are slow.
Yeah.
And I've got a publisher. I've got a proper publisher with distribution, and I think things are just moving off. But I'm quite pleased. I've had such a positive response from the public. It's not manifested itself in book sales, but maybe that's half the battle, to get at least the public to become interested. And even blogs like this hopefully will help.
Yeah.
I've got something next week, but it's a huge world out there. Everybody's publishing, everybody's taking pictures, everybody's on media.
Yeah.
So I have ambition. I know how many books I'd like to sell. I know how many books is the minimum that I'd be very upset if I didn't sell.
Right.
They're not big figures, trust me.
Mm.
Unless, of course, it takes off in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You never know. I mean, I think there's a lot of fans of UK and London lifestyle, and you'll be interested and eager to learn about what's going on over the pond.
If there is, I'll buy you a beer. I promise. Yes.
A Guinness, please.
Good choice.
Indeed. I tried to go to Ireland to have a Guinness in Ireland, but there's a Guinness brewery actually in Baltimore, up the road from me, so it's great.
In Baltimore, right?
So that's the best thing.
Right. Did you choose your house on that basis? Yes.
No. The military sends me where they want me to go, so. But I'm happy to be here and happy to be doing what I'm doing, happy to be in this area. We talked a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more detail about the book itself and kind of the decisions that were made in its construction and sort of choices. First off, you have an intro by, and hopefully I don't mispronounce the name here, Leilani Farah. She's the former UN Special Rapporteur on right to housing and the global director of The Shift.
Yes.
Obviously a notable figure. Why did you choose her, or who chose her to do this intro? And were there any other people perhaps that you had as sort of backups in case she wasn't available? Like, how'd you make this decision? I want an intro in my book. I'm choosing this person, or how that sort. What are the methodology there?
Again, it's a very good question. First of all, if you'd asked me, given me a list of people who I wanted to do the introduction, Leilani would have come out tops. I mean, she is so switched on to what the issues are internationally, and her organization, Make the Shift, is so well put together and organized. I've never met her personally. She's based in Canada, but I do know. It doesn't sound quite right. I do know her sister, who I work for commercially in the UK, and I had been just discussing the pictures with her, and she said, "You need my sister to do the introduction." And when she showed me who Leilani was and what she did, I just thought she's never going to say yes. But she did instantaneously. And as I said in the book, I'm delighted. I think she gives the book gravitas. I think she gives it real weight. I'm secretly hoping that she'll need a photographer to work for her organization in the future.
There you go. No better foot in the door than having them contribute to a book. Maybe you'll get. Have you met her in person yet, or?
No, I haven't. Only her sister who
Okay.
I do work for. So it's, but yes, I'm looking forward to that moment and seeing if there's possible projects to go on, to go on from there.
No, that's great. That's great. What is the shift, by the way, for people who may not know about that organization?
I think the basic premises of why there's so much homeless people worldwide, which is what she's interested in, is that most of the affordable housing is bought up by huge corporates, of which the very biggest is an American company called Blackstone, and they just buy up buildings that should be kept for people of low incomes, and they hold on to them till the price rises, and then develop them as for middle to high incomes. Yeah. And she's on a crusade to build affordable housing worldwide. She's it's a big ambitious project.
Oh yeah. No, there's so many different ways I've seen it done, and the idea of getting homeless people into housing, just getting them in a house, is like the biggest factor in terms of reducing the issue of homelessness, obviously, but also all the other contributing factors and all the other factors that exist when you're homeless and stuff like that. So getting with someone off homelessness in general starts with giving them a home in a lot of the approaches I've seen. So glad to have her doing that. In the book, you list the subject next to their photo, right? Their photo and their name, their first name typically, and also the location where they're at. What was sort of the methodology behind that decision? Like, why not put their first and last name? And then with some of the folks, obviously they didn't want to be, named at all. They're just listed as Anon, which is short for anonymous. Kind of give me the reasoning behind that decision.
Okay. First of all, if it says anonymous, it's not because they didn't want to give me the name. It's because I failed to get the name.
Okay, got it.
Okay, I need to come clean on that, because really, if they're not going to give you the name, they probably don't want their photograph taken.
Sure.
So it's that not putting the last name down is me just giving them a little protection, so that I mean, obviously the photograph is and everything, but if you put the last name, then somebody says, oh look, it's definitely your sister on the streets, because of that. So there was a little protection. And also, I think just first names is more friendly. So I think that's the way it works. Location is because I wanted to show that it was all over London. Right. And it is all over London. I just couldn't put down enough there aren't enough pages to put down every borough in London. But it was, at times it was just ludicrous. I'd wake up. I always had a colleague. I had this fantastic colleague, still have him, a guy called Richard Currell, who found me on the very first day that I was photographing. I had gone out early in the morning to near Carnaby Street, it's well known. There's a very iconic British building called Liberty's. So which is a very expensive department store. And there was this woman, she's about the third page of the book, and she's just sitting there. So I've got a picture of her with one of the swankiest department stores in London as a backdrop. And I'm talking to her, and it's just eye-opening. She's in fact Polish, and she had a boyfriend, and they were working. They lost their jobs. They got onto heroin. The boyfriend managed to get off the heroin and go home, and she can't move. She says, I can't shake the heroin. And I had never met a heroin addict in my life. Yeah. I was 62 years old, and I had never met a heroin addict in my life. And she just looked at me, and she didn't beg. Lots of them don't beg. It's another myth. And just told me her story that she wanted to go home to her parents, but she had to get off the drugs. So it was a long conversation. I said, can I photograph you? She said, of course. And I photographed. And all this time, this man behind me was watching, and I thought, he's going to give me trouble, and I'm just going to stand firm. But he didn't. He said, I've been watching you, he said. And he said, I love the way you're approaching it. And he whisked me off to his club. This is about 8 o'clock in the morning. We had breakfast, and he's been with me on nearly every single shoot that I've been on, even though he lives miles away from me, because it's like a Mutt and Jeff, a Laurel and Hardy team. He talks to them, I talk to them. While I'm photographing, he's still talking to them, and he takes notes for me.
Nice.
And I need to emphasize his role, because I think he made it fun, not just for us, but for the people we were photographing. Also, he's an amazing network. So he's probably the one who's going to get me an exhibition.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah.
By the way, was that breakfast a traditional English breakfast?
Yeah, it was. Yes, at the Groucho Club. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
No, it's a big. It's for lovely. It's for theatre people.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of my favorite fondest memories was having that first English breakfast when I was in not London. I went down south to London.
Brighton.
Not to Brighton yet. There was a stopover. I can't remember the name of the city, but a friend of mine, his mother lived in that area, and she made me a wonderful London English breakfast with the fried toast and the tomatoes and the sausage and the blood sausage and the
black pudding.
Black pudding, yeah. So 2 thumbs up to that. But
only once a month, I suggest.
Oh yeah, I think I had one other at a restaurant of that breakfast, but yeah, beans and oh my gosh, so much. But you talked about getting to know these people, right? We talked about obviously they've given you new names. Your decision was to highlight just their first name. I'm sure they would have given you their last name if you sound like you made a very good connection with folks. But there probably were people who you didn't make good connections with, or at least didn't want the attention. How did you manage that, and how often would you say that happened when you were out there?
It happened very, very rarely.
Okay.
And there would be 2 ways that happened. The first would be the straight, obvious way, in which the guy said, "I just don't want a photograph taken." He clearly didn't want to even engage in conversation. And so at which point you'd say, "Okay, thank you for your time," and you'd walk on. There would be others who were just grateful for the conversation. And when it came around to saying that we wanted to take a picture, they would say, I'd really, that you didn't, I'd rather you didn't. And some of the reasons were obvious. They would say, in case my family recognized me or somebody recognizes me, or often they were paranoid and they thought they were being chased or people were after them. Or in a couple of cases, one very particular case I mentioned, he said, "I'd rather you didn't because I'm dying. I'm going to die soon."
Oh, geez, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So whether or not they did or didn't, I'm not sure. Although I'm pretty sure one of them certainly did. But it was very rare. Most of them were happy enough to be photographed. Well, yes, yeah. And they weren't photographed unless they were happy to be photographed.
Yeah.
I need to emphasize that.
Right. Were there any instances where you maybe felt perhaps fear, or like maybe you were in a situation perhaps where there was fear, like you might be attacked, or were you pretty much safe the whole time?
I never felt the fear, day or night. No. There were times when crowds gathered around you and people got quite stroppy. What are you doing? And so on. But I usually found that an explanation, and even picking out the stroppiest of them and say, "Would you like your picture taken?"
Yeah,
and they say, "Oh, okay, then there's that."
They're on off guard.
Right.
But were you? But I mean, I'm just were you were approaching them? Obviously, they were on the street, but I mean, were you going into encampments, or were there encampments? Like, were you doing that?
There are no encampments whatsoever. They are on the streets, literally on the streets. On the street, church steps, under arcades, near air vents, just everywhere, just somewhere where they won't get moved on, at least until daylight. Yeah. There are kitchens. There are a couple of shots of kitchens. People, volunteers, just come in and they set up a table and they serve food. And you get these long lines of people.
No, I know, like, for instance, when I visited LA, right? LA, the homeless problem is so bad. And you see it everywhere. You see these tent cities practically. You can find a billion videos on YouTube about them. But again, that's what I'm talking about, like encampments, like, again, is that exist in London? Have you seen that where they set up the tents and stuff, or is that not as pervasive?
It, I don't think it exists anywhere. I think there are all sorts of issues with how that could happen.
Yeah.
In terms of the law and so on.
Right.
So, no, I've not seen that problem. Most of these people are, I mean, they have friends and they clearly make little groups here and there, but they're individuals. They each have their very personal stories of why they're on the street and what's happened to them. That we have quite a few hostels where which are all volunteer, where people try to scoop up people off the streets and take them to the hostels. But the vast majority of people on the streets don't like these hostels. Yeah. They feel, for many reasons.
Yeah.
So it's not effective.
Yeah.
No.
Getting back to the book, I noticed on the website, obviously you're selling the book by itself, but you're also selling individual prints of the certain subjects. Has there been is there any effort to give some of the proceeds of those prints or to some of those members, or is that not in the cards?
It's not. It's a good question, and we sort of touched on it earlier on. I don't want to be involved with a particular charity, or because I think it's more than just giving money. If I want to be involved with a charity, I think there has to be a relationship with that charity. There has to be a strategy about how my photography is going to move forward that particular charity. And and then it becomes not just the photographer, who I like to call the artist, and his subject. It becomes a whole machine behind me.
Right, sure.
I don't know. I promise to come back to you. If I start to make money,
yeah,
I'll let you know what I've done with the money. It's quite an interesting question.
Yeah. You gotta get past that point of profitability, or at least that point of covering your costs first, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And even the prints on my site are, I mean, they're quite large. They're hand printed.
Right.
You'll guess there's not a lot of money in it.
Sure. No, totally.
And yeah.
Getting back to the book design choices, I thought it was interesting that you put all the stories in a grouping at the end versus with the actual photo. Was that just aesthetically pleasing, you want to make it, or was there a reason why you grouped those together?
You ask all the right questions. There's been a lot of arguments about this. First of all, it's designed. I have a great designer called Ross White. He's credited in the book. He is incredible. He gave the book a certain rhythm. He gave it the style, and technically he prepared it very well for printing. So that helped hugely in many design decisions. For a while, I didn't want to put any information about each of the people in the book, and the thinking was that you'll recognize this as far too egocentric photographer. I thought the pictures should stand by themselves without any explanation. I thought, if you're that good a photographer, Anthony Dawton, the pictures will say it all. But I was persuaded out of that, and that is arrogant. That's a little bit, and I'm glad that there is some information about some of the people in the book. And I think it's a good compromise that you have to look at the picture. You're not distracted by reading and then looking at the picture. It was a very difficult decision.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it could go either way, honestly. And I thought, at first I thought there was no stories, right? I thought when I was reading through it, I read through it linearly, right? And I thought, okay, it's just going to be their name, their location, and the picture. That's it. Okay, fine. I can accept that. And then I got to the end and I'm like, oh, there's all the stories. And I thought, from a design perspective, like, it's kind of annoying from just a reader's perspective, is now I have to flip back through and see who this person was.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, by grouping all these stories together, you get a sort of burst of all the sort of stories, because everyone has a story, right? Every homeless person you talk to, there's this, the sad story about how they got to where they are. And so having it kind of all in one place makes it almost overwhelming. You get flooded with this
Right.
sort of sense of, despair and homelessness that affects a region. And so I thought that wasn't a bad design choice. So again, it can go either way. But I'm saying,
Yeah.
I that choice to me made sense, and I liked the way it was done like that. So kudos to your designer. And again, it wasn't an easy decision, but
Right.
in this instance, I think it's fine. And I thought it was an interesting choice,
Mm.
and I commend you for making that bold decision.
Right. I mean, some of the great photographic books don't have text, like
Sure.
the Americans. It's who was not William Klein. With the introduction, just the introduction by Burroughs. You just go through this amazing book, and there's nothing in it except the location.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've seen some books where it's again like you have the text and photos in completely different locations, or one after the other.
Right. Yes.
I've also seen it, with the caption right underneath the photo.
Mm.
And so, it's definitely, and if the person is so inclined, they can go back and look. Obviously, you list the page numbers in there, so they can, make that effort, and maybe gives the book sort of additional layers, right?
Yes.
So you can look at it just like you had it. You wanted just the pictures and the names, or they can even find the stories and learn more about the people. How much interest do they have in these people? How compelling are the photographs to drive them to want to find out more about those stories? So that's an interesting design choice there. And let's talk about color for an instance. For the most part, the photo, the pictures are black and white. The only splashes of color are in the logo.
Yes.
Which, the X and the O, I thought was an interesting sort of design language there, obviously representing not London, and we know the circle is the London tube, I presume, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Give me some sort of background and insight into those design decisions, color and logo and everything.
Well, the logo and the idea to have a little bit of color in the logo is Ross's idea, and that's how I think about all sorts of things. Is that I'm a photographer. Don't try and design a book, and in a way that's part of the question before you're asking. I'm a photographer. Don't write an essay about each of your people, because you're not a writer.
Sure.
Everybody's got a computer with word processing on it and Photoshop, and they think they're everything. But there is this sense of, and I'm just delighted that I had, Ross design it, and I think that I think the logo works. A little bit of splash of color, the allusion to the underground, the tube, all exactly right. Why black and white? Well, it's that legacy thing again. Just about every photographer that's done social active work, from as I met, from Eugene Smith all the way back, shoots in black and white. So I want to refer to that time, a time where photography was difficult and considered truly to be a work of art. But most important, this notion that it was real. Before digital came along, if you saw a photograph, you believed it. It's not strictly true. You could still retouch any photograph at any time it came out. But essentially, a photograph, the difference between a photograph and a painting was it was real. And I adhere to that philosophy. So I shoot black and white to tell people that my pictures are, for all intents and purposes, unretouched, apart from contrast. And they're very rarely cropped, by the way. Yeah. So it is part of the philosophy, the credibility, that what you see when you open my book is really what was there, without any alteration. So black and white, it sort of had to be. Color particularly in refugee camps and places like that is so distracting, because refugees, first of all, to our eyes, are often dressed colorfully anyway, because that's their tradition. But often they're given clothes, so they look extraordinary. They're wearing a whole jumble of clothes. And every time you shoot in color, people say, "Oh my goodness, look at that jacket!" Or "Look, she's wearing Gucci!" And you're thinking, no, that's not what I want you to look at. That's not what I'm trying to express. So it has to be black and white to stop people going, what a lovely colored tent that is, or, you know, or I had a scarf that color once. So
Interesting. So
colors are not, yeah, sorry.
No, I'm saying you equate black and white to more real than color in this instance.
I relate it generally to honesty. I think
okay.
I think color is a travesty. I mean,
really? Wow, a travesty.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, William Eggleston. I don't mean to be. Or, yeah, or who's the other one? Is it Roth? Alexander? Not Alexander. Yeah. Roth.
I need to do my research.
Okay.
Is that pervasive in your body of work, that you primarily shoot black and white?
If you look at my website, there's scarcely any color on it. There's one bit of color, and it's quite. It's very knocked back color, which I hope reflects the subject. But if you have time, have a look, and you might tell me what you think.
Definitely.
It also, I mean, you can do color, you can do black and white on your iPhones and Android phones,
sure.
But people don't. So there is that sense that people working in black and white are still professional. It's become special in some ways. So again, I live with that. And great black and white is really difficult to do digitally.
Right.
Color is, yeah. Well,
we could have a whole conversation about digital and film, maybe on another show. But
yeah, okay.
Was this film or digital?
It was definitely digital. Definitely digital. Okay. I mean, the bizarre thing here is that all my son's friends who've taken up photography and are quite good photographers, they all want to do film. They're all coming to me and saying, "How do you process? How do you do it?" And it's amazing. I mean, and they produce really interesting results. But I mean, the problem is that if you're just doing one very specific project, one portrait, you can afford the cost of film. But you know, we have 2 labs left that process E6 in London. A couple that do C41. Film is now $30 a roll. It's impossible. No. You know, the costs, and you still haven't got your contact sheet. You still haven't made your colors super chromes, or it goes on and on and on. You know.
Even back when I was shooting film in the early 2000s, like as soon as I could get a digital camera, I never went back to film. Primarily for that reason, the time, labor, and cost to get it scanned. You know, even if I was just getting the negatives, I was going to scan it myself. It's just like I just want the picture, you know.
But even that facility, I mean, in the 2000s, there were hundreds of places where you could get your negative scanned and put onto a CD. That was great, but all that's gone. There's only 1 or 2 left anyway. You know, so
it's just like it's really one of these like handcrafted, you know, now specialty. What is it? What's the word for handcrafted you hear about? Artisanal, right? Artisanal photography.
Artisanal,
yeah. Well, this was your first photo book, like you said. Are there any other photo books you think will be in your future?
Well, I'm not sure if I said it was my first photo book, because strictly.
I thought you did.
Oh.
If I misheard, then I apologize.
Well, it's my first one, I suppose. It's entirely me. But no, there have been several others. When I worked for this Armada Foundation, and they sent me off to these areas, I'd often go with at least one other photographer, and we produce books, and they're part of the Silent Witness series. So again, if anyone feels like going to my website, there's one on the Kashmir earthquake, there's one on the Niger famine, and one on Palestine, and one on Gaza after the bombings, the Israeli incursions in Gaza. So there are at least 3 books. And if anyone's interested, when I was much younger, I suppose about 30, 40 years ago, I was one of the first European photographers to get into Libya, into Gaddafi's Libya. And I produced a book called the Jamhuriya, which is the Libyan word for republic. That book now, because I think they printed 500 at the time, that book now fetches about $1,000 on
oh my gosh,
on Amazon. There's so few left.
Wow,
so yes, so in very odd times through my life, I've produced books, but I've never been fully responsible for, as in this one. The idea was mine, the organizing of and putting it together was mine, and the following of the printing all the way through was mine.
Okay, then let me rephrase my question. Do you anticipate any future books that are just you? Like, do you want to make another book that you do everything yourself, or it's everything about you?
I do. I definitely do. And there is a project that we have in mind.
Okay.
But I don't know, I should say this really, but more than books, I love prints. I love exhibitions.
Okay.
I think the struggle with the book for me is it is very nicely done. It's well printed, but there is nothing like an A1 or A0 print on wonderful kind of, cotton-based paper, with all the rich tones, bit color or black and white, framed beautifully, put it up on the wall for people to look at and meditate. It's the zenith of what a photographer wants.
Yeah.
I mean, the book is great for massive distribution, but just I want a photographic exhibition. That's what I really want.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you said there potentially will be an exhibition of this in the future.
2 or 3 people are working on it, and I'm not allowed to say too much, but
Okay.
it could be, because obviously there are better places to exhibit than others.
Right.
So I'm looking for a quite interesting one. And I promise to keep you in the loop immediately if anything.
Indeed, yeah. If there's a way to check that out, I'd be happy to go see it. Or if it tours, that'd be neat. I don't know. I don't see myself getting to London anytime soon, unfortunately.
Well,
the
let's
pandemic.
get through this COVID first, yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? That's the rough thing, But
Yeah.
definitely come see that if that, maybe I'm near DC, so if it could find its way to DC, I'd be happy
Yes.
to check that out or meet you in person for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've talked a lot. Is there anything else you would like to add before we sign off?
No, I'm obviously I'd really like to encourage people to go to both my website and to the website that's dedicated to the book.
Please go and let people know what those addresses are.
So that, to get information on the book and to buy the book, you want to go to notlondon.uk. So it's very, very simple, notlondon.uk. And then my website, which also has a link to the Not London site, is www.dawton, which is my name, DAWTON.com. And that will get you there. I'm delighted if you buy a print or a book, but I'm also just as delighted if you make a comment, or I have an Instagram site, or if you write, because that type of support means a great deal to me. You probably guessed because I haven't stopped talking really, have I? I quite like discussing these things because they need to be discussed. Otherwise you're not behaving with integrity. You need to keep feeding back. Why are you doing this? Are you sure it's correct? Are you sure you're not just doing it for your own gratification? And so on. And is it important? Is it useful? Is it art? Are you really a good photographer or not? I mean, all these things have to keep discussing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a almost timeless issue. It feels like it's gone back forever, and it feels like at least now there doesn't seem to be an end sight, right? An end goal. Homelessness will continue, unfortunately.
Yes.
Hopefully, books like yours and other activists and other activities and funds like the Shift and whatnot will make a dent and make a difference, and we could see future without homelessness. Maybe that'd be a nice pipe dream, but hopefully it'll be a reality. But thank you for raising awareness and shining a light on a important issue that definitely needs to be addressed more fully. Thank you again, Anthony, for your time. I truly appreciate it. We'll make sure to include all the links you mentioned in every other site that we can, as that I have into our show notes. So be sure to go there and check those out. You can find us on the website, and you can find Around the Lens on all of the platforms that you use for social media. We have our Instagram page, our YouTube page and all those other platforms. So if you have comments about, what we, Anthony and I have talked about, or the subject in general, you can also leave those comments there as well. We love to see that and have that dialogue and discussion continue on. Like you said, the issue still needs to be talked about, right? We haven't solved it. This book hasn't solved it yet, hopefully, but so there's definitely a lot of discussion there. But Anthony, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, really. It's been great fun, and it's me to thank you, not the other way around.
Oh, you're too kind. All right, well, I've been your host, David J. Murphy, for Around the Lens interviews. Thank you again, Anthony Dawton, for your time, and we are out.
Thanks for listening to Around the Lens. We hope you enjoyed the show. To continue the conversation, head on over to one of our social media outlets such as Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter. To support the show financially, consider donating to us via Patreon. For show notes from this week's episode and links to everything else we talked about, just go to our website, aroundthelens.com. Finally, if you or someone you know might be a good guest for the show, get in touch with us via email at info@aroundthelens.com.